Scientists examined the DNA of thousands of African Americans and European Americans, and hidden inside those genomes was a record of American history, European ancestry, Native American ancestry. But when researchers mapped where those genetic patterns appeared across the
United States, an extraordinary story began to emerge.
In 2023, a team of researchers at USC and Stanford University fed over 15,000 genetic profiles into a computational model. They wanted to answer one of the most quietly controversial questions in modern science. What exactly is written inside the DNA of Black Americans, and how does it compare to the DNA of Europeans? When the results came back, even the scientists paused, because what the data revealed wasn't just surprising, it dismantled assumptions that had been sitting unchallenged for decades. And it told a story that no history book had ever been able to fully tell. Let's start where the science starts, with a number. When researchers from the University of Pennsylvania and Cornell Universities sat down to analyze DNA from 365 Black Americans, 203 West Africans from 12 different countries, and 400 Europeans from 42 countries, they expected to find a relatively clean genetic picture. What they found was something far more complex. The range of African ancestry within the Black American population alone ran from as little as 1% to as much as 99%. Think about that for a moment. Two people who both identify as Black American can have genetic profiles that are almost entirely different from one another. One person's genome might look almost identical to someone from Lagos, Nigeria. Another person's genome might look more like someone from rural Ireland, and they might both be sitting in the same church in Atlanta on a Sunday morning. The science confirmed what lived experience has always known. Black American is not a genetic category. It is a cultural and historical one, but here is where it gets even more interesting. On average, studies consistently show that a typical Black American carries somewhere between 73 and 82% sub-Saharan African DNA, between 16 and 24% European DNA, and roughly 1% Native American ancestry. The American Journal of Human Genetics put the European figure at about 17 to 18%. Other studies, including a landmark paper published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, found a median of 18.5% European ancestry, but these averages mask something extraordinary. That European DNA did not get into Black American genomes by accident or by choice. It got there through centuries of forced labor, systemic exploitation, and the sexual violation of enslaved African women by white enslavers. Scientists who mapped the ancestral sex of that European DNA found that European ancestors in Black American genomes were overwhelmingly male, and African ancestors were overwhelmingly female. The genome itself carries the imprint of the rape of slavery. The data does not sanitize it, it confirms it. Now let's talk about what that African DNA actually is, because this is where the story gets genuinely remarkable. For most of American history, enslaved Africans were recorded in ledgers not as people with names and ethnic origins, but as cargo. 20 Negroes, a shipment from the Guinea coast, their specific identities, their languages, their clans, their kingdoms were systematically erased. For over 400 years, millions of Black Americans have lived with a void where their ancestral identity should be. Modern DNA science is beginning to fill that void, and what it is revealing is breathtaking. Researchers at 23andMe, working with scholars of African history and African American studies from 2019 to 2020, published one of the most comprehensive genetic investigations of the transatlantic slave trade ever conducted. They identified 25 unique genetic groups of referendous individuals across Africa, groups that corresponded with specific ethnic populations and spoken languages. When they applied this framework to Black American genomes, the names that emerged from the data were names that had survived 4 centuries of deliberate erasure. The Yoruba people from southwestern Nigeria and parts of Benin and Togo. The Igbo from southeastern Nigeria. the Akan from Ghana's Ashanti region, the Wolof from Senegal, the Mandinka from Gambia, Guinea, and Mali, the Mende from Sierra Leone, the Congo from Central Africa. These are not distant, abstract populations. These were kingdoms and civilizations of enormous complexity, and their DNA is still alive in the bodies of Black Americans today. If you want to understand where specifically those ancestors came from, you can follow the slave ship routes. Historical records from the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database show that approximately 25% of Black American ancestors were shipped from Senegambia, modern-day Senegal, and Gambia. Another 25% came from Congo, Angola, the region encompassing modern Congo, Angola, and Equatorial Guinea. West African regions including Upper Guinea, the Gold Coast, and the Bight of Benin accounted for the rest. Studies tracking mitochondrial DNA, the genetic material passed only through mothers, confirmed that more than 55% of Black American female lineages trace back to West Africa, with the remainder coming from West Central and Southwestern Africa. The DNA is a map, and for the first time in history, people can read it. In December 2024, a study published with support from Harvard Medical School analyzed the genomes of enslaved individuals who lived and worked at Catoctin Furnace in Maryland. The researchers found that these individuals descended primarily from the Wolof and Mandinka of Senegambia and the Congo of Central Africa. This was not just academic. The study connected living Black Americans today to those specific historical individuals through shared DNA. Henry Louis Gates Jr., the Harvard historian whose PBS series has helped millions of Black Americans explore their ancestry, called it a tool for empowerment. If you have found this video valuable so far, take 2 seconds to subscribe, because we are just getting to the part that genuinely changes how you understand what Black American DNA carries inside it. Now here is what no one expected. When scientists began comparing the specific genetic variants found in Black Americans to those found in Europeans, they did not just find differences in ancestry percentages. They found that Black Americans carry genetic variants that simply do not exist in European populations, variants forged over tens of thousands of years by one of the most biologically demanding environments on Earth. This is deep and important. Africa is the most genetically diverse continent on the planet. This is not opinion. It is one of the most replicated findings in all of population genetics. The reason is time. Modern humans originated in Africa and have been living there for at least 300,000 years. Every other population on Earth, Europeans, Asians, Native Americans, descends from a small group of humans who left Africa, carrying only a subset of African genetic diversity with them. Scientists call this the founder effect. Imagine you have a bowl with 10,000 different colored marbles. A small group leaves the room with only 200 of those marbles. The rest of the world is built from those 200 marbles. The African bowl still has all 10,000. Sarah Tishkoff of the University of Pennsylvania, one of the world's foremost experts on African genetics, put it plainly. Only a small subset of the diversity found in Africa is found in Europe and the Middle East, and an even narrower set is found in the Americas. What this means for Black Americans is profound. Their African ancestry is not simply a portion of their genome. It is the deepest and most diverse portion of the human genetic record. When researchers at Penn State decoded the complete genomes of Southern Africans and compared them to European genomes, they discovered something that stopped the scientific community in its tracks. Any two Bushmen from different linguistic groups were more genetically different from each other than a European is from an Asian. They found 1.3 million genetic variations that had never been observed in any human DNA ever studied before. Never. These were not variants from Mars. They were ancient human variants, variants that evolved in Africa over hundreds of thousands of years, variants that the rest of the world simply does not have. And some of those variants are written into the DNA of Black Americans today. So what do those variants actually do? This is where the research becomes both astonishing and urgent, one of the most studied genetic variants in African and African American populations, is located in a gene called APOL1, a polypoprotein L1. In its base form, the APOL1 protein plays a role in immune defense. But in African populations, two specific variants known as G1 and G2 evolved over thousands of years for a very specific purpose. They provide powerful protection against African sleeping sickness, a parasitic disease caused by trypanosomes and spread by the tsetse fly across sub-Saharan Africa. The variants essentially render the parasite unable to survive in the human bloodstream. This was an evolutionary survival advantage of enormous consequence across much of African history. Europeans, who never faced this parasite in their ancestral environment, never developed these variants. They are extraordinarily rare in populations without African ancestry. Approximately 13% of Black Americans carry 2 copies of these APOL1 risk variants, and about 50% carry at least one. The ancient protection this gene provided against parasites in Africa is one of the clearest examples of natural selection at work in the human genome. It is also a reminder that every genetic variant that African populations carry was shaped by a specific environment, a specific challenge, a specific history. None of it is arbitrary. The same logic applies to sickle cell trait. About 1 in 13 African Americans carries a single copy of the sickle cell variant in the hemoglobin gene HBB. In its full double copy form, this produces sickle cell disease, a serious and painful condition. But carrying a single copy confers a remarkable benefit: significant protection against malaria, one of the most lethal infectious diseases in human history. In regions of West and Central Africa where malaria was endemic, people who carried this variant survived at higher rates than those who did not. Their children survived. Their grandchildren survived. And today, hundreds of millions of people of African descent carry this ancient protective signature in their DNA. It is not a flaw. It is evidence of survival across millennia. The ADME genes, the genes that govern how the human body absorbs, distributes, metabolizes, and excretes drugs, are significantly more diverse in African Americans than in Europeans. Research comparing the genetic architecture of these drug metabolism genes across populations found that African American profiles were dramatically more varied than European ones. Even after accounting for admixture, this has enormous implications for medicine. For decades, the standard drug dosing guidelines, clinical trials, and pharmacological research were conducted almost exclusively on European or European-descended populations. The result is that millions of Black Americans have been receiving drug treatments calibrated for a genome that is fundamentally different from their own. This is not a political claim. It is a scientific finding, published in peer-reviewed journals that the medical community is only beginning to fully reckon with. But here's where one of the most startling findings in this entire field of research sits. Almost nobody is talking about it. In 2016, 2 landmark studies published simultaneously in the journal Cells set the scientific world buzzing. A team led by geneticist Luis Barreiro at the University of Montreal, working alongside researchers at Cornell, Duke, and Wayne State, collected blood samples from 175 Americans, roughly half of African descent and half of European descent. They isolated a type of immune cell called macrophages, the cells the body sends in first to destroy bacterial invaders, and infected them with live Listeria and Salmonella. Then they watched what happened. The macrophages from Black Americans killed the bacteria 3 times faster than macrophages from European Americans. 3 times faster. And when researchers measured gene activity during the immune reaction, they found that about 30% of the roughly 12,000 genes they tested were expressed differently between the 2 groups, even before any infection had occurred. The immune systems of Black Americans and European Americans are, at the genetic level, operating by different rules. A parallel study led by Luis Quintana Murci of Institut Pasteur and CNRS in Paris reached the same conclusion from a different angle. African ancestry, they found, is associated with a significantly stronger inflammatory immune response. The reason, according according to their analysis, traces all the way back to the environments these populations' ancestors lived in for thousands of years. Africa runs from north to south, crossing multiple latitudes, climates, and ecological zones. The pathogens there, malaria, sleeping sickness, typhoid, and a vast range of bacterial and parasitic threats, are more numerous and more aggressive than pathogens that shape populations in colder, less biologically dense European environments. Over tens of thousands of years, African immune systems were forged to respond faster and hit harder. But here is the twist. The European immune system is not weaker. It is differently calibrated. The reason comes from a source nobody anticipated. When early modern humans left Africa roughly 100,000 years ago and reached Europe, they encountered a population that was already there, the Neanderthals. For thousands of years, they did more than just coexist. They interbred. That interbreeding left a genetic mark. Approximately 4% of the modern European genome carries Neanderthal DNA. Researchers at Institut Pasteur found that this Neanderthal inheritance specifically influenced the way European immune systems respond to viruses. Certain immune regulatory genes in Europeans carry sequences that are nearly identical to Neanderthal variants, but not to African variants. In other words, the European immune system was partially rewired by an extinct species, a species that Black Americans' African ancestors never encountered. This is not science fiction. It is published, peer-reviewed, genomic fact. The immune systems of Black Americans and European Americans diverge not just because of what happened in America over the last 400 years, but because of what happened on two different continents over the last 100,000 years. The Neanderthal encounter quietly reshaped European biology. The African immune landscape quietly forged something different, older, more aggressive, and more battle-tested by a planet full of parasites, pathogens, and diseases. Now let's talk about the European DNA inside Black Americans because it tells its own disturbing and complicated story. When researchers mapped the direction of gene flow between African and European populations in Black American genomes, the pattern was unmistakable. European ancestors in Black American DNA were predominantly male, while African ancestors were predominantly female. This asymmetry is not coincidental. It is a genetic record of one of the greatest atrocities in human history. For nearly 250 years, enslaved African women were systematically subjected to sexual violence by white men who held absolute legal and physical power over them. The genome remembered what the legal system refused to prosecute and what the history books often euphemize. When a child was born from that violence, their DNA carried both ancestries, and when that child grew up and had children of their own, the pattern continued, generation by generation. The European DNA that entered Black American genomes was almost always paternally inherited. Paternally. Today, when a Black American receives their ancestry results and sees an 18% European figure, they are in many cases looking at the genetic legacy of rape, repeated across generations, encoded into their cells. This makes the resilience of the African DNA all the more extraordinary. Despite centuries of deliberate efforts to sever Black Americans from their ancestral identities, no records, no languages passed down, no surnames, no maps, the African DNA held. More than 3/4 of the typical Black American genome is still anchored in the continent where humanity began. Resilience. A USC and Stanford study published in 2023 in the journal Genetics took this further than any previous research had gone. Using computational analysis of over 15,000 genetic profiles, researchers calculated that a Black American born between 1960 and 1965 descended on average from more than 300 African ancestors and more than 50 European ancestors, all traceable back to the period when captive Africans were first brought to North America beginning in 1619. 300 African ancestors, people who were not abstractions. They were real, identifiable individuals, people who belonged to specific ethnic groups, spoke specific languages, and built specific civilizations. The Yoruba built one of the largest cities in the pre-colonial world. The Mandinka were scholars, traders, and empire builders along the Senegambian coast. The Congo had a sophisticated political system, a system of writing, and a spiritual tradition of extraordinary depth. These were not primitive societies. These were functioning civilizations, some of them larger, wealthier, and more administratively complex than the European nations that were simultaneously enslaving them. Their DNA is in Black America, and for the first time in 4 centuries, science can trace it back to them. The study also reveals something about timing that hit hard when researchers examined it closely. The admixture, the mixing of African and European DNA in Black Americans, occurred predominantly in the American South before the Civil War. That means the vast majority of that European ancestry entered Black American genomes during the period of slavery itself, not afterward. The data confirmed not just the ancestry, but the era. The genome is a timestamp. Let's close with what all of this means, not just scientifically, but for the people whose DNA is at the center of this story. For generations, the narrative about Black American identity has been constructed almost entirely around subtraction. What was lost? What was taken? What was erased? The language of genetics had, for most of the 20th century, been used to divide, to rank, to justify hierarchy. But these studies tell a fundamentally different story. They reveal that Black Americans carry inside their genomes the oldest and most diverse genetic heritage in the human species. They carry an immune system calibrated by hundreds of thousands of years of African life, faster, more aggressive, shaped to fight pathogens that the rest of the world never faced. They carry protective variants against parasites and malaria that were built by evolution long before European civilization had written its first word. They carry the DNA of kingdoms and civilizations that predated the European nations that would later enslave them. And they carry all of this, while also carrying in the same genome the biological evidence of what was done to them. The genome is not just a biological document, it is a historical one. It records migrations and settlements and births and violence and survival. And what the science now confirms is that Black Americans, a population that endured the Middle Passage, the plantation, Jim Crow, and systematic exclusion from the institutions of the country they built, carried within them all along a genetic inheritance that stretches back to the very origin of our species. 30% of the immune genes that differ between Black Americans and Europeans differ because one group's ancestors never left the oldest continent on Earth, because they stayed and were shaped by it, and were made stronger by it in ways that science is only now beginning to fully measure. And then across chains and ocean and centuries of deliberate erasure, they carried all of it here. That is not a metaphor. That is what the data shows. If you want to know what happens when scientists run the same analysis on the DNA of European Americans and what unexpected ancestries, what hidden origins, and what genetic surprises they found buried inside genomes that everyone assumed they already understood, that is exactly what we are covering next. Make sure you're subscribed. You do not want to miss it.